Tess. All right. Hello, everyone. My name's Nathan Fritz, and I'd like to thank you all for coming to see Beloit College's 2014 Victor Ferrall Artist-in-Residence. The militant bicyclist, offbeat knitter, and prolific artist, Lisa Anne Auerbach. As the LA Times put it, it takes a certain kind of courage to hop on a bike and traverse a city teeming with SUVs. It takes a different kind to wear a sweater of your own design, bearing images of fetuses, the number 8, and the phrase, marriage for all, octuplets for none, an allusion to the octomom phenomenon. Welcome to the life of Lisa Anne Auerbach. Auerbach received her MFA from the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, and is a professor at Malmö College. She's exhibited widely across the US, but her work has gone as far as Europe, Asia, and Australia. Auerbach's artwork has been written about in Art Forum, the Detroit Free Press, the LA Times, and the New York Times, and in 2009 she received a Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Award. This year she'll be participating in the Whitney Biennial, which is like the Tour de France for artists. Remember, Lisa's big into bicycling. Her famous sweater skirt outfits walk a line between fashion runways, gallery displays, and snappy social commentary. A blend of traditional craft and contemporary high art, Auerbach's socially conscious sweaters fit both old grandmas and hip art connoisseurs. They're positively electric with Auerbach's DIY buck the system attitude, channeled through the conduits of the pressing issues of today. At the same time as Auerbach's sweaters sport an of-the-moment potency, their permanence, as opposed to, say, a political poster, and the labor inherent in their knit production provide a refreshing meditation on the fleeting sensationalism common in political dialogue. One of my favorites reads, "What's your favorite thing about the War on Terror?" It's a provocative question I continue to find new answers to every day. Though Auerbach is perhaps most notorious for her innovative knits, she embraces a wide variety of techniques and mediums in her work. She enjoys working in printing processes and has produced tracts, zines, and magazines. 5-foot-tall magazines, the first issue of which featured American megachurches, churches with thousands of members. In another work of hers, Torn Porn, Auerbach was gripped by hot, nasty, and illicit, her words, not mine, inspiration when she found scraps of porn magazines on the muddy ground and kept them. Her monumental reproductions of these pornographic fragments, about 5 feet tall, are mysterious and enticing. My personal favorite, Feather Duster, features, let's not get into details. While Auerbach doesn't shy away from new ways of working, she always carries her knitter sensibilities with her. Trust me, I and many of my fellow Beloit art students have been working with Lisa on an on-campus installation that will blow your darned socks off. Sorry. Using a grid exactly like a knitting pattern, Auerbach and the Beloit College art students have drafted plans for a painted brick path leading to the Wright Art Museum. We're working on it now, and I think you should all be very excited to see it soon. More cause for excitement surrounds Auerbach. I hear tell that just 2 weeks ago, Lisa visited Afghanistan to talk to rug manufacturers, and while I don't yet know what she'll produce from this venture, the premise is titillating. Most pressingly, though, I'm looking forward to hearing Lisa speak. So, without further ado, present to you Lisa Anne Auerbach.
Introduction. I hope I can live up to the hype. And I want to thank Beloit College for inviting me here, specifically the Department of Art and Art History, and Mark Clausen for taking such good care of me and all of his students for their time and energy. And thanks course, to Vic Ferrall for making this possible, this residency. So I wanted to talk about, people in the back, do you want to sit in the front, or you have to go somewhere? It's fine, but, okay. I'm going to try and stick to 45 minutes to an hour, so I'm going to go pretty fast. I want to show you a lot of images, and I'm going to start with, not my cat, but with the first photograph I ever took. Oftentimes when I'm talking to undergraduate students, I find it may be helpful to talk about where I came from and how I got to where I am now. So I'm starting with the first photograph that I made in the darkroom, which was at the Chicago Botanic Gardens in like 1976 when I took a photo class. And I realize now that photos taken when you're 8 are not such a big deal because every 2-year-old is wielding an iPhone with camera capabilities. But when I was that age, it was a little more of a big deal, and so I was in the darkroom with chemicals, probably poisoning myself for life. This is a photograph of me on my, I think, 10th birthday with my grandmother, and I include this photograph because it shows my early love of chocolate and also my early interest in kind of anti-capitalist, like corporate parody. So that Kentucky Fried Buzzard t-shirt is like a wacky pack. I don't know if you remember those. An early penchant for dress-up, which has followed me into my later years, and a letter that I wrote to President Carter in 1980, where I say, if I were president, I would make things better for kids by developing new sources of energy. I don't know what happened to that. And then it says, new sources of energy instead of into war. What's the purpose of fighting? If we find new sources of energy, we wouldn't have to fight for Eastern oil. So I don't know, I think you should have listened. And my mother, when I was growing up, made a lot of quilts. And this is an example of a quilt she made about Chicago. I grew up outside of Chicago, and so you can see all the things that I like to do. Obviously, I'm an only child, so it's me standing in the middle of all the things I loved in my home city of Chicago. And if you look close up, you can see there I am. There's the Chicago Historical Society with Lincoln, the Klaus Oldenburg bat, the subway. And down at the bottom, it's my father riding his bicycle past an old-style graffitied piece of concrete, and my grandfather flying his kite over Lake Michigan, and as well all the signs that we passed on the way. And I show this as just an early, I had kind of an early relationship with textiles that comes to play, obviously, later in my work. And so I think some of this inspiration I got was from my mother. When I got to high school, I picked up a camera and started taking pictures. This was kind of an early, this is from high school, just I thought it was funny. And then when I was about 17, I started going to hardcore punk shows in Chicago and bringing my camera. And again, like the 17-year-old suburban girl in the pit with the camera was not probably what it is today. And so this is Kevin Seconds from 7 Seconds. And so I was I felt like I was putting myself in danger for art. I don't know if I was or not, but sometimes I did get the camera knocked out of my hands. It would fall. And this is something I did when I was, I think I graduated high school in January because I couldn't stand high school, and then I took some classes at the Art Institute of Chicago before I went off to college, because I didn't want to go to art school because I thought that was for losers, and so I wanted to go to a real school, but I did want to have this semester where I took an art class, and so these are the photographs I made during that time. When I graduated from high school in 1985, my best friends, Anna and Jane, gave me this book called The New Games Book as a high school graduation gift. Ever consider pursuing a career in new games? And new games, I don't know if you know this or not about new games, but it was developed as sort of an anti-militaristic game, series of games for children, so that you could have play without ideas of winning or losing. And their overarching idea was play hard, play fair, nobody hurt, and everybody wins. And I thought, that's really dorky. And then I found it sort of coming into play in my life as an artist. 20 years later, as social practice starts to become on the horizon, I started thinking a little bit about new games more. When I finally transferred to photo school, my first documentary project was about a nudist colony in upstate New York, where I went wearing only my camera. And I found myself in double-wide trailers with these nice men. And that's me with my friends at the nudist colony. So that was an early photographic project. And all that's to say that my work up until, or my work at the beginning was always about photography. And I continue to use photography a lot in my practice. I didn't mention anything about graduate school, because I kind of see that as like the black hole of experimentation. But I'll start again in 1994, 95, when I graduated from Art Center, and I got a job at Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles. And Griffith Observatory is a public observatory that was given to the city of LA with the idea that looking at the cosmos is going to make humanity better, basically. That's kind of the upshot of Griffith J. Griffith's idea. Griffith Observatory published a monthly publication called the Griffith Observer about what was going on in the heavens and at the observatory. And when I started there as part of the darkroom staff, we started keeping a logbook about what happened in the darkroom, and we decided to start publishing that as the Casual Observer. So this was the official publication. This became our publication. And this first issue, that's the darkroom staff, and we're out of focus, and we're in front of Griffith J. Griffith's grave in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. This is our logbook, where we wrote all sorts of gossip, scandal, news, and observations about working at the observatory. What we didn't really realize when we started publishing, I made the decision one day, like, we should just publish this. It's ridiculous. No one knows what we do. Let's tell everybody. And what we didn't realize is that things like the photograph of our fixer beaker, or Daniel, who was my co-conspirator, almost tripping on a banana for the safety issue, that these things became really popular, not only amongst the observatory staff, but amongst all of our friends who were dying for the next chapter of what was going on in the darkroom at the Griffith Observatory. That's me doing a cartwheel. I was emulating, it's a dramatic recreation. I saw a blonde girl doing a cartwheel, so we redid that. And then we also had access to all of the historical archives of Griffith Observatory, so we did a then and now section. That's the Tesla coil then and now, and that's the moon model, which became Patrick's office. Another aspect of that project, and this is the first zine project that I ever did, and I didn't anticipate what was going to happen. Like with most of my projects, I never know what exactly is going to happen with the project. And what happened was that not only were all of our friends and everyone who worked there interested in what we were doing, but the people who worked there alongside of us wanted to be involved. And so this is a page that I gave to the guys in the shop called Shop Talk, where they would basically just kind of bitch about the bureaucracy, but in a really sweet way. That's the obituary for the squirrel that I killed accidentally, and that's the head of Griffith Observatory that I went on a hike with the American flag. Our last issue of the Casual Observer was called the Nearly Naked issue, and so we had, well, this is Irene, and she likes to be naked in the darkroom, just with her apron. And this is Christina reading kind of astronomically appropriate erotica, so Delta Venus, in Griffith Observatory's library. That was our last issue of the Casual Observer, which lasted, I think, a year or so. I can't remember how many issues, maybe 6 or 9, I can't remember. And then I quit my job there and started doing other sorts of freelance work, including becoming a reviewer of pornography. So I was a freelance porn reviewer for several years, including doing reviews of things like Splashed and Messy Girls, which are wet and messy porn, which was kind of my favorite kind of pornography because I was also working at the same time for Paul McCarthy, who's an LA artist who was covered in all sorts of liquids in his own work. And so there seemed to be a real crossover. I was also at the same time reviewing art for Art Forum, and I was writing about skiing. So it was a really interesting time in my life where I felt like I was the holy trinity of magazine writing, skiing, porn, and art. As a character I came into contact with on a set. And so when I started working and as a writer primarily, I started working at home, and I really missed the camaraderie of being at the observatory and having the casual observer and all of my colleagues there. And so I decided to start a magazine about working at home and being at home that would maybe create the same kind of community that I had at a physical work site. And so American Homebody was born. And this was May 1998. So this is just before blogs and the internet. And I mean, the internet was there, but you wouldn't have like an online publication like this, where we had letters from the editor, we had recipes, we had things about home that people sent in. And very famously, the column What's That Bug was born in American Homebody, which that's Daniel, who worked with me at the observatory. What's That Bug? Eventually, after Homebody went online, What's That Bug became its own website, whatsthatbug.com, and it's now one of the premier bug identification websites on the web. And it just is a really great note of caution that if you are looking up bug information, that you may be looking at bug information from someone who is like an artist who had a zine at one time. You know, I mean, he's not a bug person. Anyway, so that was born in American Homebody. We also had the Homebody of the Month column. So we had a lot of different columns, and the idea was that people would write in, and we would distribute it, and you would have this feeling of camaraderie across work sites. This one year we did a calendar, and so this is some photographs from the calendar. This is the cover that Dave Muller made of sort of watercolors of Polaroids. And then the calendar was really collaborative. I worked with Daniel to take most of the pictures. I was the persona of the American Homebody cover girl, and I posed in various ways. So here I'm a kitten in the tree, and Dave Muller is he's a firefighter rescuing me. In this one, I'm a real doll. So I happen to be at the Real Doll factory where they make 135-pound silicone sex dolls. And I'm posing in the middle with my Real Doll friends. But Charlie White, I don't know if you know his work, he's an artist as well. He redid my body and face to look like a real doll. So it's pretty manipulated. I was not that tan. This is the Homebody cover girl if she were to eat too many chocolates and read too many Kippenberger books. And this is the American Homebody cover girl on the phone. This is a tattoo that Charlie gave me. And yeah, that's with the UPS man. After American Homebody went online, and I sort of lost interest, so AmericanHomebody.com was online for quite a while, and then I just got sick of updating it as a blog, as folks often will. And in 2003, I started another publication called Saddle Sore. And Saddle Sore was born from the idea that I was on my bike. I started riding my bike to protest the war, I guess, in Iraq in 2003. And I decided that I would try and be part of the solution. And my response to that crisis was, I'm going to try not to use any more gas in my car. I'm going to ride my bike for a month and see how it goes. So I rode my bike for a month to see how it goes, and then I got totally addicted to my bike. And everybody started asking me, like, how do you ride your bike? You're a woman. It's Los Angeles. And so as a response, I started publishing Saddle Sore, which was just really a journal of what it was like to be on a bicycle. And Saddle Sore was small enough that I could keep it in my saddlebag and pass it out to fellow cyclists. So these are just the covers from Saddle Sore. That's the most recent one, number 5. If it ain't rough, it isn't fun. I was listening to a lot of Lady Gaga, I guess, at the time. And number 6, still ongoing. Maybe it'll happen. While I was on my bike in Los Angeles, I started noticing these small freestanding buildings. And I started to feel a real kinship towards these buildings. So me on a bicycle as a sole individual in very wide streets full of SUVs, I started feeling this kinship towards these unnoticed small businesses that were in these vast seas of big box stores. And so I started photographing them. These are all photographed with a 4x5 camera, and so they're sort of real architecturally sound, traditional photographs of these small freestanding businesses that if you were driving by in a car at 30 miles per hour, you might not even see. But if you're on a bike at 10 miles per hour, these businesses suddenly emerge into view. So I became really interested in them, in the signage, in the way that it felt like they were individuals, in the way that I felt like an individual in the landscape. This one is gone now. It's a parking lot, and this one is still there. This one I just went by recently, and it's a coffee shop now. This is in Studio City. And remember this, well, actually I'm not going to show this. This photograph from 2003 led to the magazine project that I have at the Whitney right now, which is about psychics. And it kind of came from this picture, or it did come from that picture. This is the smallest post office in America. It's in Florida. This is a very patriotic hot dog stand, also in Florida. And this is the Center of Achievement, which, if you were wondering, is in Florida. When I was in graduate school, I started listening a lot to the music of Cheap Trick, and I was really interested in them as a model, really, for the idea of a pop album or pop musicians, what made pop music so delightful. And one of the frontmen of the bands who plays the guitar is Rick Nielsen, and Rick Nielsen always wore these awesome custom-made sweaters. And the point of the sweater for him, I believe, although I've never really heard him talk about it, is that it really defined him as the nerd. And he had a real, like, if you look at the members of Cheap Trick, you've got 2 hunks and 2 nerds, basically. You've got, like, 2 sort of hot guys and then 2 super nerdy guys. Like, Bunny Carlos, the drummer, is kind of, you know, a dork. And then the other, Robin Zander, is, like, all suave. I mean, this is I don't know what, so it's a different idea of what suave and nerdy is, I guess. Maybe today he'd be the cool one. I don't know. Anyway, so it defined him as a persona into this kind of cozy, nerd, sweet, approachable, funny guy. And I was so interested in the way that his sweaters had statements on them of all different things that might be directed at a certain person, maybe, or things that were just about being in a band, the name of his band, you know, the idea of being quizzical or just not getting it, confused. And he was always posing with these sweaters. I mean, it was just, I was really obsessed with the sweaters. And so when I graduated from graduate school, I lost access to a color darkroom, and so I was fending for myself at that point and decided to learn to knit to make a Cheap Trick sweater in order to be able to continue making art, basically. And so I started looking at examples of other sweaters that maybe had text or knitting that had text aside from Rick Nielsen's sweaters, and found very few examples in the history of knitting. This is one from, as it says, 1780, and it's an entire poem knit into a mitten. And supposedly, according to the text, and this is in a book called No Idle Hands, A Social History of American Knitting, which is a great book if anyone's interested in knitting. And this was a blind woman knit this sweater. And so for anyone who knows how to knit and how to knit with charts, the idea of having that chart in your head is pretty incredible. This is a page from Annemore Sundbo's book called Everyday Knitting Treasures from a Rag Pile, which is about Norwegian sweaters. And when I first saw this book, I was just so excited about these patterns and the idea of potentially putting text into these specific patterns. This is an image from her rag pile in Norway. The idea that you can become a can of beer by putting a sweater on you, I think is really interesting. There was a whole raft of beer sweaters from the 80s that were made, mostly acrylic. You can get them online from time to time now. Probably they all came from Milwaukee. And when I learned to knit, the first sweaters I made were handmade, and so this is actually the second sweater I ever made, which was kind of, it was about the idea, well, I was at the YMCA once, and there was this guy who had a giant Jewish star tattoo, and I thought that was really cool, but then I was thinking about, I didn't really want to get it as a tattoo, but I'd like to knit it in a sweater that felt almost like a tattoo, because it felt like that same kind of level of dedication, knitting a sweater to me at the time. So I made this sweater that, then I put my initials on it and realized it looked like the Dodgers, and so it sort of became like the Jewish Dodger sweater because of the color. And then I put number 32, which is Sandy Koufax's number, who actually was the Jewish Dodger who didn't play on Yom Kippur. So it became like a Sandy Koufax sweater. In 2004, I finally got a knitting machine. So up until that point, I made sweaters by hand occasionally. I didn't make a ton because they are very time-consuming. But in 2004, I got a knitting machine and thought that I would single-handedly be able to make like 5,000 John Kerry sweaters and that he would win the election because of my sweaters. And I didn't realize that a knitting machine is not like the kind of machine that you use to make a cup of coffee where you just like push a button. It's actually like really complicated and time-consuming. So I made a few sweaters, but he lost the election probably because I wasn't able to meet my goal. So this is one of those early sweaters, and it was one of the first sweaters where I figured out how to make my handwriting a part of the design. So Dick Cheney Before He Dicks You is it's kind of a, there was a slogan about Dick Nixon, that was Dick Nixon Before He Dicks You. So this was in reference to that previous election slogan. This sweater was just about like the joy of being on a bicycle and feeling how you could own the city on a bike. And this is a sweater about Hurricane Katrina, where I was experimenting with the idea of the joke being on the front and the back of the sweater at the same time. So you would see like the question coming towards you and the answer as you left. My first exhibition of sweaters was at the Copenhagen Konsthall, which is this small kiosk. It no longer exists because it got in the way of the snowplows, but it was there for I don't know how long, and that was my first official exhibition of sweaters. This sweater was made specifically for an initiative. Now I can't even remember. You know, in LA we have these voter initiatives where you vote on all sorts of things, and this was about allowing 18-year-olds to seek legal abortions without parental consent. And so this sweater was made in reference to that. Oh, those are my cats. In 2007, I made a banner for a show called Auerbach-Oktoberfest, where I made two banners, Things Can Only Get Better and Things Can Only Get Worse, which were about ideas and topics both very general and very personal. So kind of conflating global and personal concerns, like blossom end rot was something I was really concerned about at the time because I was growing tomatoes. Desperate housewives I was really concerned with because I was, I don't know, obsessed with it. But things like waste, pollution, greed, disease, and feedlots were a little more beyond my scope. And then things can only get worse. This also came after a project I did about unicycles, which was really about this balance. I don't know if any of you ride a unicycle. I don't think I included that project in this presentation, but I ran a unicycle shop briefly. That was a rental concern. This is a flag that was knitted, and it was knitted in shades of red and pink, and it was about the idea of the color red. and how I felt like it was stolen from liberals, basically. That socialists and communists always had the color red, and why should the Republicans take red? It's a great color. It's blood and tomatoes and all these things. So it was basically like a religious tract almost, or a manifesto that was knitted into this flag about this color. And it was really big. It was like as big as that screen, probably. I have a collection of knitting pattern books, and I'm always looking for those as well for inspiration and ideas about how to photograph knits. One thing that I've often noticed is the prop that doesn't really seem to function. So bicycles are a big popular prop in knitting magazines, as are things like rackets and Cokes. I don't know what. I really don't understand this one, but I love it. I feel like, first of all, you shouldn't smoke a cigarette on the cover of a knitting magazine, because that just suddenly brings up the idea of like holes. And then the Coke on a rope. Anyway. So when I did my first knitting book, which was a book published by Printed Matter called Charted Patterns for Sweaters That Talk Back, I kind of took note of different ways that knitting had been portrayed in knitting books. And since I had 18 unicycles because of my unicycle shop project, I decided that unicycles would be kind of the prop that wouldn't get used in my knitting magazine. So you can see off to the side there's like some unicycles. What's that one? Oh, actually, yeah, that's the front and the back of the same sweater. I made sweaters that were overtly political, but I also made sweaters that were very much about my own concerns. So this is a sweater about feral cats and the idea of trap, neuter, release. So it says, I love my feral cat, I spayed my feral cat. And then it says TNR on it, which is trap, neuter, release. And I made that, and that cat in the picture is my cat who was born to this cat, who is a feral cat that lived in the backyard. So it was about specifically this situation. This sweater was about, I wore this to City Hall in Los Angeles, and it was to protest the expansion of a liquor store that was basically in my backyard at the time. So I started a concern called the Jefferson Park Temperance Union, and we used the slogans from the Women's Christian Temperance Union from Prohibition times. So one slogan, it said, "'Tis here we pledge perpetual hate to all that can intoxicate. Neighbors say no to century liquor." And then I'm drinking a glass of wine in the second photo. This is the sweater that Nathan mentioned, the fetus sweater with no on 8. And Proposition 8, it was made to protest Proposition 8, which was the proposition in California that would make gay marriage illegal. And so everyone was all up on arms. No, wait, make it, yeah, illegal. So no, okay, yeah. But it was also at the same time as Octomom, which was also in the news. So it was like this whole thing about the number 8. And this was in 2009. So it's just after the iPhone came out, but before everyone had the iPhone. So people are still text messaging on flip phones. And the number 8 is used as a shorthand when you're text messaging, like create, CRE. So the back of the sweater is all these terms like procreate, hate, don't hate, whatever, using the number 8. So it's kind of a sweater celebrating the number 8. This was a sweater I made because we didn't have Sharrows in Los Angeles, which we now do. So I figured I would bring my own Sharrow with me on my bicycle. So it's this lane is our lane. Good way to get killed on a bike. And then this is a sweater, Thank God I'm an Atheist, which was about being an atheist. This is a sweater where this is about Michael Jackson, who died. Do you guys know who Michael Jackson is? He was like a pop singer. And for some reason, I was really upset when he died. I don't know why, but I was like where was I? I was at UCLA, and he was dead at the hospital at UCLA. And so we walked over after this meeting I was in and saw the hubbub on the grounds of the hospital. And I just felt this like horrible thing and connection. And I didn't really care about Michael Jackson, but suddenly I cared so much. So this was about the idea that a pop star could have a really dark side, because in the end, like, he was found to have OD'd on the thing that puts you in a coma to go to sleep. I mean, it's just crazy. It's like so dark. Because you think about all these like heavy metal guys or like punks, and they're all doing heroin or whatever, and this guy was doing like propofol, which is just so crazy. So I made this sweater that kind of conflated Metallica and Michael Jackson. So enter light, what does it say? Exit light, enter night, take my hand off to Never Neverland, which is, of course, the name of his ranch. And then the other side was Prince of Darkness, King of Pop. And there's like syringes on the skirt. Then I got a job teaching at Pomona, which was really far from my house, so I was no longer a bike commuter all the time. And so I made a sweater that says, I used to be part of the solution, now I'm part of the problem. Just to sort of, face that head on. And this is how a lot of those sweaters and skirts were shown when they were exhibited. This is an exhibit at the University of Michigan Museum of Art. So they were displayed on custom mannequin torsos. This is a sweater about heroes and terrorists, and again, really thinking about language and about those words and how they can be kind of turned depending on who you ask. And this was a project I did in Nottingham, where I'm kind of referencing Robin Hood and thinking about the ideas of heroism and terrorism. Another thing I discovered on my bicycle was this place, which is the Free Tract Society. I used to ride by it on York every day and wonder what it was. And one day I went in and found out it was a distribution hub for religious tracts. And you could buy the religious tracts by the pound, pretty cheap, and then distribute them however you wanted. And I thought this was a great model for distribution of ideas. I wasn't so psyched about the content necessarily, but I thought the model was incredible. And religious tracts, if you've ever seen them on the street, are all really different. Like, this is one that's just a small, it'll fold up a couple times, and it's question and answer. Others are more graphic. Some of them are more hip. Some of them take other sorts of common vernacular, like the Thomas Guide, which is the mapping system of LA, and kind of riff off of that. So I was interested in the different ways that tracts, in the end, said the same thing, but could be distributed to a lot of different kinds of people. So I decided to make my own tracts, and I asked my friends to write things about things that they cared about, asked them to write manifestos about whatever was irritating them or made them crazy or that they loved. And so this is one of them about revolution. This is one that's about honeybees and the scarcity of bees. And this is one about rules for living. She just wrote all the rules that she wanted to talk about. This is Beware the Roly-Poly Man, which was about capitalism. And this was the distribution place that I set up. It was called the Tract House. And the first manifestation of it is in Baltimore. And this is what the inside looked like. So it wasn't as many tracts as they had at the Free Tract Society, but it's as many as we could make. And I think we made 70 different tracts, and there were a few hundred copies of each. And so the stacks and the heights of the stacks would change as people were interested in one thing or another. I loved the stacks. I thought they were just so beautiful, just these stacks of printed material. And then this was the second version of the Tract House, which was in Philadelphia. And this is the quote I had on the wall, that the little pocket pamphlets are the things to be feared. And that's the second version. Maybe I should skip through some of the, this is, I started in 2011 making banners that were about kind of New Year's resolutions, and then those became banners about failed New Year's resolutions and amended New Year's resolutions, which became banners about advice that other people gave me, or advice I gave myself, or I can't even remember what these things, I think this is advice that other people gave me as well, and then ideas about what kind of protest signs I would bring to a protest. So these are all large knitted banners that are about 63 by 80, I think, and they're stretched on linen, and they function almost as paintings or tapestries. And it's something that I've become interested in, this black and white, size and shape making these drawings and knitting. So it's something I've been continuing that I started a couple years ago. Last year, I did a project at Malmö Konsthall about the knitting style, I guess, called Hønsestrik. And Hønsestrik was a Danish knitting book that came out in 1972, I believe, by a woman named Kristen Hofstadter. And it was really popular in Scandinavia for about, I don't know, 5 minutes or something, like not very long, but it was a real anti-capitalist and feminist and DIY kind of idea about what knitting could be. And the pictures were so exciting. When I found out about this, I was blown away because I had been doing all of this work with politics and knitting, and no one had ever told me about Hønsestrik. Hønsestrik there's very little information about it in English, which is why I never had heard about it. It's not in any knitting history book in English. But when I found the books, I just felt this real kinship with the women, the mostly women, who had made these sweaters using iconography that was unfamiliar to Scandinavian knitters. They used a lot of iconography from Mexican and South American sweaters, Peruvian sweaters, a lot of colors that were not popular in Scandinavia, real colorful, crazy rainbow patterns. And they were really interested in being against any sort of tradition of Scandinavian knitting, which I quite liked. So this is just a drawing from the book. This is a knitting demonstration, is what that translates to, and I did a really terrible translation of this. But I love this quote on the bottom: "There must be a path between the bourgeois model on the one hand and the aesthetic on the other, a road that takes into account the class struggle requirements and the natural need to adorn themselves." So this idea that like you can be a revolutionary, but you don't have to be schlumpy. And this is a pattern that they published in their book. So I was obviously not the first person who was making these like iconography, these political iconography into sweaters, but I didn't know about it until like 2 years ago that this had happened. And these are from those sweaters, hammer and sickle. Someone in the Hønsestrik family went to Africa, so there's a lot of pictures from Tanzania in the book. And kind of African-ish motifs, I guess. So when I was invited to do a show in Malmö, Sweden, which is across the bridge from Copenhagen, I decided I was going to do a show that referenced Hønsestrik, that made contemporary Hønsestrik sweaters. And I can't make so many sweaters personally, so I asked the director of the museum to find a factory to make me sweaters. But instead, what he found was a group of knitters who had been active in the Hønsestrik movement in the 70s, led by this woman, Hanna Plisted, who was amazing. And she had a knitting club called Serious Knitters for Fun. It was Serious Knitters ... for fun. And so the Serious Knitters for Fun group were commissioned by the museum to make 25 sweaters that then the staff of the Malmö Konsthall wore during the run of the exhibition. So during the run of the exhibition, everyone on the staff wore a sweater, and if you were visiting the exhibition, you could see whoever was kind of about, on their lunch break or working in the bookstore. And I went to Sweden to photograph the sweaters, and then we made a publication, a catalog of all of the photographs I made of the workers. This is Morgan, and he's in a Sharrow sweater. This is an early picture from the Hønsestrik book, but it influenced this photograph of Marika, who's wearing a sweater that says, in Danish, "Would you buy a used knitting machine from this woman?" And the iconography is knitting needles on there. The slogans for these sweaters were given to me by the staff of the Konsthall, things that they would want to wear. Some of them were from the knitters who I asked to come up with some slogans as well, and some of them were my invention. So this is chicken knitter. Honsestrik translates into honsa is hens, and stricka is knitting, so it's chicken knitting or hens knitting, which is the women's knitting. This one is about the fruit shelf, because I was at the time living in this kind of quasi-commune in Los Angeles where we had a shelf instead of a bowl for fruit. So I was celebrating the fruit shelf. And he loved it. Pear, who worked at the bookstore, thought it was like the greatest thing. So he wore that all the time. This one just has motifs. This is that Weezer song. You might know. This is the director of the Konsthall. Same one with the cat posing outside. Another Shero. This is a sweater I designed for myself because I was doing a lot of Muay Thai at the time. So it's like a Muay Thai sweater, and it says "Know your striking distance" on the back. I never speak with my neighbor. And what was great about this project is that the people who worked at the Malmö Konsthall took me to their favorite places in Malmö, or places that they wanted to show me in order to make the photographs. So this photograph is taken in their sunroom in their apartment on the 13th floor. And this photograph is taken on this dock in the river that was, they kept telling me it was just one more block away. I'm carrying my tripod and all my stuff, and it seemed to be really far, but it's in the city. This sweater is about Zlatan, who's a real famous Swedish soccer player who got his start on this field in Malmö, across the street from the Konsthall, so she went there. So it was like a fan sweater. Where I got my only ever review on a soccer blog because of that sweater, which I was really psyched about. Occupy yourself first is an idea about the Occupy movement, and then we went to this park called the People's Park in Malmö, where she walks every day across the park to get to work. This is in the backyard, and it's a sweater about composting. This one is, I think the slogan translates to, "Is there more freedom here?" And this is Magnus in the shop. "Wool is gold for the environment and for you" was a slogan that the knitters had wanted. She was dating a sailor who was at sea, and so she wanted to go to the lake, or to the sea, to sort of be longing in the sunset after the sailor. And her sweater says "Touch me" on the back and "Don't touch me" on the front. And it was her idea to take her pants off, just to be clear. She's on maternity leave. She had just had a kid, and of course you get a year, so she was still on maternity leave, and we photographed her with her child. Mats took me to the stable to meet the horse that he rides once a week, named Cadeau, and it says, "Would you buy a used car from this man?" They all had bicycles and bicycled to work, and so this was just done right outside the Konsthall. That's the back of the fruit shelf. Big Brother is watching you. That was just in the exhibition, and this is all of the sweaters on the staff. While I was in Malmö, I also did a tile installation. It was the first tile installation that I've ever done. Second one will be here. And it was based on the Honsestrik sweater patterns and some text that I put in. And this is a dancing granny motif, which you might have noticed in some of the other sweaters. And these are patterns that were in the Honsestrik book, these like crazy faces with the hair. And then it was installed in the Malmö Konsthall during my exhibition of the sweaters. For the opening of that exhibition, because I hadn't physically made these sweaters, the Serious Knitters for Fun had, I decided I was going to make a sweater to wear. And so I made a sweater that was really in the Honsestrik tradition, meaning that I didn't know what it was going to be until I was done with it, really. I just sort of started knitting at the bottom, and then whatever I felt like knitting in at the time was what got knit in. So it became about Pussy Riot and Pussy Galore and cats. So I got to use my favorite cat motif, which is the cat butt on the top, which I had found in Norway. And then I got so into Honsestrik Then I made a pair of pants. That was a journal of just experience during a 3-month period. And during that period, for instance, my boots got a leak. So you can see like my leaky boot, that's patched with shoe goo. And then in the knitting, you can see like a boot with a leak. So it was a way to record experience, like a diary on pants. And so these are hand knit, all of those. At the same time that I was doing these knitting projects, I started photographing megachurches in Los Angeles. And this one is in Detroit. This one is in Arizona. And this one is in Florida and Detroit. And I had no idea what I was going to do with these pictures because I really didn't want to put these imposing photographs of these giant churches and big frames on the wall. And the time I was doing this, I was doing another zine project. And so the two kind of came together in this idea of the magazine. And the magazine is a really big zine. And it's an opportunity for me to make 30 by 40 exhibition prints that are then in a zine that you can flip through. So this was the cover of issue 1. It doesn't look so big on in this slide, but you can tell how big it is when you see the mega girls, bigger and better, turning the pages. And this is what they looked like, some of the pages. So these photographs are each 30 by 40 photographs, and they're really beautiful prints because they're pretty pristine prints. They're shot with a medium format digital camera, and they're printed they're just really, like, I think, pretty. And if you want to see American Magazine #1, it's going to be at the Ski Club in Milwaukee on Friday night, if you're interested. We're having an opening there. I guess this past summer, I went to Shetland to learn about knitting. I went to a knitting conference there, and inspired by the black sheep, I decided to make a sweater about the idea of black sheep. So again, this is a hand knit sweater. This one's knit from the fleece of a black sheep, a black spelsow Norwegian sheep, and it's about the idea of darkness and maybe a little bit about antisocial practice. So that's the pants and the sweater that I think are on the poster, and that photograph where my friend, what happened was I went back to my car to get my tripod, or back to the car to get my tripod, and my friend Rachel, because there was a veer in the path, wrote my name in wool on the ground. So that's what that was. And then I saw my name, and I was like, I got to take a photo. This is the installation at the Whitney right now, where instead of the mannequins that were just the half mannequins that held the sweater and the skirt, instead I decided to have full mannequins so that I could have them wear pants. So those pants and that sweater now, that's where they are. And you can see in the foreground, that's the new magazine. And in the background is a banner. Well, the new magazine is about psychics, and the banner in back is about things that psychics told me. And this is another banner that consists of kind of the babble, or not the babble, the advice that psychics gave me. And then this is the cover of American Magazine #2, which is in New York right now. So that's basically it. I'm going to show just a couple more things, which is what's been going on here at Beloit, which is we've been painting these bricks. A lot of different colored bricks, stacking them up, which looks quite grand, not as grand as it's going to look when we lay down a path. This was a collaboration between myself and a number of students here, some of which, well, you know who you are. Obviously, you probably have paint on your hands. I scrubbed really hard so that I wouldn't for this presentation. We've been painting for the last, well, it's been a while, I guess. And this is what the path is going to look like, basically. It's one continuous path, but this is basically what the design is, which is a statement from the statement of culture mixed with the former name of the hill, the As You Like It Hill, where the installation is going to go. So be on the lookout for paths that look like this, coming soon to a grassy knoll near you. Oh. I'm going to stop there and see if any of you have questions.
was a very interesting presentation. As a knitter, I've got some questions on your knitting. What kind of fabric do you use? What yarn do you prefer and why? When you're making the patterns for the knitting machine, how long does that take you usually? And then how long does it take you to do the actual knitting on the machine? I'm talking about the sweaters and skirt combination.
I use, for my machine, I use Jaeger spun and I use Silk City Fibers Super Merino because that's what my machine, it won't jam with those. When I hand knit, I use a lot of different kind of stuff. This is all made with a yarn company from Denmark that donated the yarn for the project, but it's unfortunately New Zealand wool. I've gotten much more into this Spelsau Norwegian wool for projects. I'm making a pair of mittens right now out of a Wensleydale from England. So when I travel, I generally pick up a lot of wools, more local wools, and I've been learning to spin recently. First of all, I wanted to make this sweater out of a black sheep, so I couldn't find black sheep wool, so I learned to spin, and I got a bunch of black fleece, but then I found some black fleece or black wool in Norway. So anyway, so yeah, I'm involved in those choices, but it's mostly wool. I mean, it's always wool. I'm always using wool, which sucks because we have a big moth problem in Southern California. In terms of time, it depends. It's always different. Designing takes a long time. Coming up with an idea takes a really long time. Making the design and getting it to be perfect takes hours and hours. It can take up to a week. It depends how much I'm working on it. The knitting, the actual knitting on the machine, again, varies because if you're a machine knitter, which I suspect maybe you are, or no, the machine is really finicky. So it can take, in a really good, like if everything's going really well, it can be a day to knit all the pieces and then another day to sew them together. But oftentimes there's some glitch. The yarn breaks, something jams, there's like a moth ate just a little bit, so there's like half of it doesn't, it's just like, the knitting machine's a nightmare, to be honest. So that can be like a 3-hour time suck where all the stitches fall off and you're like, do I sacrifice or do I lift them back up? So it depends. It depends on how much it's faster than hand knitting. Like much faster, but it's not necessarily, it's stressful. Yeah. But the designs I make for my knitting machine are all made in Photoshop. So they're all like pretty serious multi-layered Photoshop files with a lot of masks and things like that. Yeah.
What is your connection to the different Scandinavian countries, particularly Denmark and Sweden?
None.
Just because it's nice?
I started using Norwegian knitting patterns in my work because when I was growing up in the 70s outside Chicago, Norwegian sweaters were what I associated with being sweaters. Like that was what they looked like. Those patterns were really familiar to me. When I found Anna Moore's book about Norwegian patterns, I started stealing from that book and using those patterns. A few years later, I went to Norway and met the woman who wrote that book, and I thought she would hate me because I had like stolen her heritage. But in fact, she thought that the best thing that could happen to those patterns were that they could have another life in another context, and that they could keep a connection to Norwegian history, but live on in other ways as well. And so I found a real ally in someone who I thought would be a real protector, which was really great. And so she and another friend of hers were the people that told me about the Hønsestrik knitting. And it was just so hard to find any information about Hønsestrik knitting. And now, in this day and age, when people talk about knitting as political, and there's talk about craftivism, and there's talking about knitting in public as a political act, I felt like that precedent of Hønsestrik needed to be brought to the current generation and needed to be talked about as a precedent for it, and also as a really great example about how politics and knitting can be intertwined in a really beautiful way. So I wanted to work on that idea in that project because of that. So, I don't know. My best friend growing up was Finnish. I don't, yeah.
Have you ever been involved in a knitting bomb?
No.
No?
No, and the sweater, that sweater that's made out of the black sheep, it says on the base, it says, sweaters may hold an explosive power, but I am not a yarn bomber. That's what it says. Because people always ask me about the knitting bomb. I know. I don't know. I've never been a knit bomber or whatever, yarn bomber. No, I never have done it. I'm not, yeah. I know. You know what? There's time.
What does it mean?
Like you knit around the parking meter and stuff, right? Like knitting on, putting knitted fabric on things in the world. But I'm more interested in like the sweater. So that's, I mean, I'm just more interested in wearing. So I've never done it. I know, it's also, I'm so precious about my knitting. Like, why would I want to put it outside? I don't know.
All those machine knit boo-boos, they could go out there on the fences.
What's a boo-boo?
And then they'd have a life.
Huh? Oh, the boo-boos, the mistakes. Oh, right. I usually try and save them, but yeah, you're right. Yeah.
When you knit things like your things can only get better, things can only get worse piece, and you include things like Christians or right-wing conservatives, are you hoping for some greater conversation between the two sides, or are you simply putting yourself out there? Like, are you hoping for some pushback and dialogue, or is there just...
I think when I'm wearing the sweaters, I'm hoping for a dialogue, and I find that the yarn and the form of the sweater and the form of the knitting can invite conversation in a way that a t-shirt might not. Like, it does seem like I have had conversations with people who don't necessarily agree with me about politics, which have been amazing because of the sweaters that I'm wearing. In a piece like that, which is not a sweater, it's really about just what I'm thinking about. So it's not necessarily about being in a dialogue. Yeah.
So I guess as you've gone into other mediums that aren't sweaters, how do you think the content has changed? Just because it seems that for you the sweater is sort of like about like personal slogans or like personal sentiments. Like has the content changed as the media has changed?
Well, I started in photography and zine publishing, which was all about, I mean, the publishing has always been about an idea of like getting the word out or about some sort of individual agency or ideas about talking about one's ideas, really. So it felt like the transition between writing and writing on sweaters was not a really much different one. It was just a different form in which to put ideas out into the world. I started thinking about the sweaters as another form of publishing, as another form of like DIY zine publishing, but there's only one of each one as opposed to 100 or something. So the magazine seems to be really close to the sweaters in terms of a model because there's very few of each magazine. So it's like a sweater is an edition of one, you know, there's one copy, circulation 1. The magazine are circulation 2 or 3. The tracts are circulation 500 or whatever. And so this idea of like circulating ideas through different kinds of print media, I think runs through all of the different kind of tentacles in my practice. So mostly I'm doing photography, knitting, and publications. And if I can wrap them all together, then you can put it under the umbrella of self-publication. And if you look at the word publication, it's like it's self-public. You know, it's putting, a publication is putting something out into the public. And so a sweater can be a publication if you wear it out. So that's how I started thinking about them moving together, working together. Yeah.
I'm curious about the relationship between your art and your teaching now, and also the fact that so much of your art is political, and I'm curious about how you think about your relationship between your art, politics, and teaching.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think teaching's become really important to me in many ways. One is just the idea of like influencing another generation has been really great, and having the opportunity to have a dialogue with that other generation. When I feel like, you know, my friends are my age, it's really been great to be able to talk to younger people. In terms of politics, I'm not very preachy in the classroom. I mean, I tell people they should take the train, you know, go to LA. I don't know if that's preachy, like get out and do something. But I'm not like super, I don't know,
I mean, do
political.
You see, sorry, Caroline, but I mean, do you see the, how do you talk about, I mean, so you're not preachy, but how do you talk with them about their art? It's an expression, I mean, how do you talk with them about their art and their own relationship to kind of the world? Do you see them asking?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that in critiques a bit, you know, trying to make them feel like they're an individual in a world as opposed to an individual just dealing with their own issues. We talk about, you know, communicating ideas in their artwork. And I don't usually use myself as an example in the classroom. I don't show my work at school. I wear it sometimes, or they're aware of it, or, you know, oh, where were you last week? Oh, you were in the Whitney? Okay, they don't care. They're just like doing their own thing, you know? So I don't really bring it in hook, line, and sinker, but I'm sure that my ideas translate in some way, and I'm encouraging of them to create their own worlds, I think. Live their dreams. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question.
So how did you manage to balance freelancing so many different kinds of writing articles and jobs?
Just make lists. You just stay up late, make lists, you know, have fun with it. Try not to freak out. Get it done. Don't be lazy. I don't know. You just got to do it. I don't know. I did so many jobs. I can't even tell you how many crazy jobs I did. Just.
I guess did your interests just motivate you to lead you where?
I think I was always. I've always been really curious, and I think that's one of the things that I take with me to being an artist and also to teaching, is just an idea of being curious about the world. And so when I was given an opportunity, I always took it, no matter how weird it was. I mean, when someone called and was like, hey, do you want to write for porn magazines? I was like, I've never seen a porn. Sure. You know, like, I'm game. I'll do whatever. You want to write for ski magazines? Sure, why not? I don't barely ski, but I'll do it. I mean, it was really like, at that point in my life, I took opportunities because they were interesting and because they were experiences, and I made lists and got things, you know, finished whatever I had to do, I guess. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And it was less about, I don't know if it was about a balanced life. It was like, it was about not getting a full-time job and staying afloat and having experiences and being interested in the world and being able to satisfy a curiosity about the lives that other people led.
All right, I think we'll stop there.
Thanks.
Well, let's thank Lisa for.
Thank you.
Thank you.